Once upon a time, in a wonderful city, there lived a man named Stephen. He had an exciting adventure in a hotel, which began when he booked a room there. This room came with a special offer, a free breakfast for two people. The next morning, full of anticipation, Stephen went downstairs to enjoy this breakfast. As Stephen entered the breakfast area, he noticed the server. The server didn't seem happy to see him. In fact, the server looked at Stephen in a not-so-friendly way and asked loudly, "What do you want?" Stephen, a bit surprised by this, explained about his complimentary breakfast. The server, however, told him abruptly that he had to leave. Stephen was confused and disappointed. He didn't know that he was supposed to present a coupon, which he would find with his room key card. Feeling a bit puzzled, Stephen went back to the front desk. There, he learned about the coupon for the free breakfast. With the coupon in hand, he returned to the breakfast area. He presented the coupon to the server, hoping for a better response this time. But the server had another reason to turn him away. He said Stephen couldn't have breakfast unless there were two people. Stephen had to go and wake up his brother, who was still sleeping in their hotel room. Together, they went back to the breakfast area. They placed their order, one breakfast for Stephen and one to go for his brother. After placing the order, Stephen's brother decided to go back to the room to eat and sleep more. Stephen was left alone again in the breakfast area. The server, however, didn't pay much attention to him. He didn't offer water or check if Stephen needed anything. Meanwhile, other guests received much better service. Finally, a different staff member, a food runner, brought Stephen his breakfast. Stephen ate, feeling a bit ignored and unwelcome. When it was time to leave, Stephen thought about the service he had received. He decided not to leave a tip for the rude server. Instead, he approached the kind food runner who had brought his meal. Stephen handed him a $20 bill, thanking him for his service. The look on the rude server's face was unforgettable. Stephen wondered why the server acted so unpleasantly. He thought about how important it is to treat guests nicely, especially if you expect a good tip. Stephen loves sharing stories like this one. He encourages people to enjoy and share tales of clever revenge now. Let's move on to another story from Stephen's life. This one is about a time when he didn't own a truck. Stephen lived in a big city where he didn't need a car. He usually used the subway or buses to get around. For grocery shopping, there was a big store just a few blocks from his home. One day, after shopping, Stephen was walking home. He carried one grocery bag in his arm and another in a small backpack. As he walked through the parking lot, a lady suddenly stepped in front of him. She was very upset and started yelling at him. She accused him of parking his truck too close to her car. Stephen saw the situation in the parking lot. There was a little orange hatchback parked very close to a large white pickup truck. Both cars were in their spots, but they were so close, only the width of the painted line on the pavement separated them. As Stephen looked at the cars, the woman kept yelling at him. She called him names and demanded that he move his truck. Stephen knew he was short and didn't mind. He also knew that sometimes people who are upset pick on others who seem easier to upset. But Stephen didn't always have patience for this kind of behavior. He decided to stand up for himself. He told the woman he would park however he liked, and he was not going to move the truck. She kept yelling and mocking him. Stephen remained firm, refusing to move the truck. While they were arguing, a man walked by, threw something in the back of the pickup truck, got in, and started to drive away. The woman was shocked and speechless. As the truck drove off, Stephen said, "I never said it was my truck." Then he continued on his way home, leaving the woman confused. Next, I'm going to share another story. This one is about revenge on a class teacher. When Alexandra was 16, he had a class teacher who was 28 years old. Alexandra was the only girl in a group of 3 boys. She knew a lot about what the boys were planning and doing. Whenever the boys did something wrong, the teacher would question Alexandra first. But she didn't really know about their plans. The boys told the teacher to stop questioning Alexandra all the time. They pointed out that it was not okay for her to always stand alone with a group of boys. In their class, there were about 15 boys, and Alexandra was the only girl. It was awkward for her. The class teacher didn't like Alexandra, but he couldn't do much about it. She had the best marks in the class and was always the top student. Even though she sometimes did crazy things, the teacher couldn't complain because of her good grades. The teacher at Alexandra's school decided to spread a rumor about him. He wrongly accused Alexandra of being in a relationship with one of his male friends. In Alexandra's country, relationships between students were not allowed in schools. The boy had a little keychain that Alexandra had gifted him on his birthday. He showed this keychain to the principal as supposed proof of their relationship and mentioned that Alexandra always hung out with him. Both Alexandra and his friend were called to the principal's office. There, his friend made it clear that he didn't see Alexandra in a romantic way. Alexandra also said that he didn't see his friend as anything more than a friend. Alexandra explained that the keychain wasn't unique. His other two friends had the same keychains, just in different colors. He also had received gifts from each of them. The situation became more complicated. The principal called the other two friends to the office. It was an embarrassing situation. Some people even assumed Alexandra was in relationships with all three boys. They confronted their class teacher about her behavior, hoping it would end there. However, the teacher went further and informed their parents. Alexandra's dad, who was friends with one of his friend's dad, was told everything. Alexandra shared how the teacher always questioned her and even complained to the principal. This wasn't the first time the teacher had done something like this. Alexandra's dad was furious and complained to the school. Eventually, the teacher was transferred to another school. Alexandra's dad made sure the teacher didn't lose his job, but he also ensured the teacher wouldn't be at their school anymore. Many students were relieved, as Alexandra wasn't the only one targeted by the teacher. The teacher had also accused others of inappropriate relationships, even when there was no evidence. Alexandra is still friends with those three boys, two of whom are now married, and one is in a serious relationship. Alexandra believes that it's wrong to assume that close friendship always means something more. The next story is quite different. After college, Dan worked in the marketing department for an NBA team. There, he encountered an obnoxious middle-aged woman who worked as a secretary. She spent her days at her desk in the lobby, eating snacks from the break room, and was generally unpleasant to coworkers. Dan often found his lunch half-eaten or missing from the employee fridge. One day, he caught her swapping her unripe banana for his ripe one. Dan came up with a unique way to deal with this. Over the next few weeks, he brought extra bananas to work. He secretly duct-taped them under her desk. After about 3 weeks, her area and the entire lobby started to smell bad from the rotting bananas. The secretary had no idea what was causing the smell and became increasingly frustrated. She complained to maintenance and the janitor, accusing them of not doing their jobs properly. Dan left the job 6 months later, and the secretary never discovered the source of the smell. 2 years later, Dan ran into his former supervisor from the team at a bar. A few months after Dan left his job at the NBA team, a funny thing happened. The janitor discovered the bananas he had duct-taped under the secretary's desk. Dan met his former supervisor at a bar and told him about the banana scheme. They both laughed a lot about it. The next day, Dan sent a picture of himself holding a banana to his former supervisor. He framed the picture and put it in the break room, where it still hangs. Dan was glad they had a positive reaction. He thought it was risky to reveal he had been taping bananas under a desk in a shared workplace. It could have attracted roaches, gnats, or even rats. But fortunately, it didn't cause any pest problems. The next story is shared about a time he was driving in a complex on a rainy, dark night. It was his first time there, and a car behind him had its bright lights on. This made it hard for him to see. The driver behind seemed to know the complex well and was impatient. To deal with this, the storyteller drove very slowly and stayed in the center of the road, making it impossible for the car to pass. He thought if the other driver hadn't been using bright lights, he would have let him pass. But now he made sure the other driver would take longer to get home. The storyteller reflects on how people sometimes react in traffic when others are being rude. Instead of speeding up, they might slow down, especially if they're not in a hurry. Another story is shared about his ex-boyfriend ruining her Christmas, so she ruined the ex's birthday. When Diana was a teenager, she dated a guy she thought was great. However, she later found out the guy was gay and had hidden this from her. Diana found out through someone else, which upset her a lot. This happened around Christmas, spoiling her festive mood. To get back at his ex, Diana waited until her ex's birthday. She then told the ex's new boyfriend everything that had happened. The result? The ex got dumped on his birthday. Diana reflects on the importance of honesty in relationships and the consequences of lying. This is another story about the storyteller's experience as a mechanic. He is working in a factory. He emphasizes how important it is for him to have his tools organized. He apologizes for his grammar, admitting he's a bit tipsy, but finds the story amusing. In the factory where he worked, there were no air hose reels. The place was chaotic, and he had his own air hoses. However, some coworkers, who he refers to as nut rounders, would use his air hose and leave it lying around. One day, he found his air hose wrapped up in a low-profile electric pallet jack, which frustrated him. To solve this problem, he created a new air hose with a unique trick. He inserted a ball bearing into the hose. This modification meant that the hose would only give out a short burst of air, either a few seconds if fully extended or just a quick spritz. He found it hilarious to watch his coworkers get frustrated when the air hose didn't work as they expected. He would then coil it back up and hang it next to his toolbox. He enjoyed using magnets and had previously found a magnetically coupled air cylinder with very strong magnets. He cut one up and put it in the glove of his right hand. With this setup, he could use the air hose effortlessly, but his coworkers couldn't. The three main culprits who were misusing his equipment were particularly baffled by this. The older workers in the factory seemed to understand what he was doing, but kept quiet. They observed how he had a unique ability to make the troublesome air hose work, while others couldn't. The workers would comment on how he could use the air hose without any issues, wondering how he managed it. Now we move on to another story about dealing with a difficult situation with his roommate's partner. For 2 years, the storyteller struggled with this person, who almost never stayed at their own home and acted as if the storyteller's flat was their own. They never cleaned up after themselves and even tried to kick him out of his own room without his roommate's permission. One day, the partner complained about he walking around the flat in a skimpy bra. He was just quickly grabbing a clean shirt from the drying rack. He was frustrated from constantly picking up and cleaning their dirty dishes, pulling wrappers out of half-eaten food, and throwing away trash they left on the floor or counters. The storyteller talked to his roommate, saying if the partner was going to stay that long, they needed to contribute to cleaning the flat or at least clean up after themselves. After this conversation, he went out for the day. He returned home to find a surprising change. The partner of his roommate was in the kitchen, which was mostly clean. The dishwasher was running, and the partner was baking a cake. This was a significant improvement for him, as usually, when the partner did something in the kitchen, they left a mess of dishes and trash behind. Additionally, the partner was unusually quiet around him, not saying a word, another win for him. A few hours later, the storyteller's roommate came into his room and offered him a piece of the cake. The cake was excessively sweet, a funfetti cake that tasted almost like cotton candy. Stephen found that when paired with something bitter, like black coffee, the cake was quite enjoyable. His roommate and her partner didn't like bitter flavors, so they couldn't enjoy the cake as much as Stephen did. They'd had to watch him relish the cake they had made and cleaned up after, for someone they were not fond of. Stephen mused over the situation, thinking about the overwhelming sweetness of the cake and how it was almost too much without the balance of coffee.